speak to you this evening, we've got two people who are really famous in the ITIL world and service management world. First of all, we've got Stuart and Rance, who will be telling us about the evolution of service transition. And then we've got Ivor and Macfarlane, who's going to talk to us about people things. Okay? They're both ITIL authors. And so, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Stuart.
Thank you. Hello. That's me. That's my name. Anybody got a phone with them?
Yes,
Please turn it on. You've got my Twitter handle up there, so you can start tweeting now. Yeah, we used to come into these things and say, please turn your phone off. It's completely inappropriate nowadays, isn't it? There's a lot of things that have changed since the ITIL books got written. I was hoping Ivor was going to be in the room because I was going to say, if anybody's got any questions, don't wait till the end. He's up the back there, so just throw your questions to Ivor and I'm sure he'll be happy to answer them. I claim to be the author of the 2011 version of ITIL Service Transition, but actually it's a complete con because Ivor and Shirley wrote ITIL Service Transition and I just did a minor edit and got my name all over it, which was fantastic for me and a bummer for Ivor. What I want to talk to you about is a little bit about what's important in service transition, what you need to think about, what the issues are, where it might be going in the future. So, if we think about service transition and what it's about, what you have to do is to support the rate of change that your customers need whilst protecting them from the negative impact of change. And if you can do both of those, you're probably doing a pretty good job of service transition. And when I can say, if you can do both of those, when I have a look at your metrics for change management or for release management, I expect to see a small number of KPIs around, do you minimise the negative impact? And a small number around, do you support the right rate of change? What I actually find in 90% of the customers I go to is a large number of measurements around, do we protect the business from the negative impact of change, and no metrics at all about, do we support the rate of change they want? And that's potentially a problem. Now, not every organisation is like that, but many are. It's very, very common. So how do we do that? How do we facilitate a rate of change and get rid of the negative impact? Well, we tend to package changes into releases to make the testing more efficient, to make the deployment more efficient. We like to test things before they get deployed rather than wait until after they get deployed and saying, did that work for you? And ideally, we should do some kind of review and authorisation before each step along the way. We should have various gateways and checklists to make sure that things are reasonably solid, reasonably well built, and reasonably going according to plan to try and avoid the sorts of catastrophes that I'm sure we've all heard about. And then right down at the bottom, that's some of the stuff we use to achieve it. So we put in cabs. We have different authorisation levels for different sorts of changes. We tend to have fixed windows for changes or releases. We have some kind of asset and configuration management and definitive media libraries, and we create baselines. We do all this stuff. We don't do that stuff for its own sake. Well, we shouldn't. We should be doing all the stuff like cabs and authorisation levels and change windows and that to achieve those two top-line things. Actually, there are two other things that organisations tend to focus on as very high-level requirements for service transition, as well as the rate of change and the negative impact. One of them is making sure that the business can get the value out of new and changed services that they expected to get. And the last one is making sure that we use IT resources reasonably efficiently during transitions. So I don't care if you've got one or two metrics around those as well, but the key ones are those two there. So here's some questions for you, just to give me a feeling for your service transition environment you're in. Can you put your hand up if you have a CAD within your organisation to authorise changes and to manage changes? Surprisingly few, and the rest of you just not in IT organisations.
Ad hoc basis. We do have a CAD, but it's very, very used.
Interesting. That's quite unusual. Usually when I ask that question, I find most people say they've got some kind of help. Okay, this is an interesting one for a show of hands. Can you put your hand up if you regularly and reliably implement changes in the times and the speeds that your customers need? I won't say once, I'll say need. One, that's fantastic. What sort of organisation do you work in?
So actually I work in mobile and we actually do Agile.
Wonderful. So you work in, what, a telephone company?
Yeah, I work for Nokia.
Oh, okay, fantastic. That's very interesting. I've almost never had anybody put their hand up for that question.
And interestingly, we don't have a cab either cab, so that's kind of an interesting
I'll be
thing.
talking about Agile quite a bit during the session because how service transition can support Agile environments is something I'm quite interested in. So, next question I'd like to know is, can you put your hand up if you have an environment where you regularly and reliably implement changes without having a negative impact on your customers? One. You can come over here and deliver this. I may well come and ask you for some experiences. Why do I ask those two questions? Because we just agreed that the purpose of service transition is to implement changes at the speed the business wants whilst protecting them from the negative impact. And when I ask those two questions of audiences, I get a very similar reaction to the one I've had here. Most IT organisations don't do particularly well at either of those two. And that's quite worrying if you think, what we do, what's service management about? And definitely what's service transition about? Okay, the last one I'm interested in, this is really for my interest, do you have a formal release management process? About 4 or 5 out of what, 35 people here? Again, that's what I typically see. People seem not to have a release management process. So, please do come in today. You get all of these people who pontificate about service management theory and write books about it. And, you know, they were writing about release management back in 1990. Most IT organisations still aren't there. So it's all very well to talk about the future of service transition and where it's going, but actually a lot of IT organisations aren't where it's at yet, which is quite interesting for me. So, many businesses are looking for speed. They are looking for faster implementation. I was talking to somebody in the Bank of England a few days ago and they said, we don't need speed, we just need to not lose the money. I've got some understanding and sympathy for that. For most organisations, speed to market, speed of development, speed of testing, and speed with which business can go to market with new business things is what they're really interested in. And I'm going to be talking about things like Agile and DevOps and cloud and all sorts of stuff that people do to achieve that. It's important to understand that those things are techie things that IT people are interested in. What your customers are interested in is time to market for their new ideas. And when IT holds them up and stops the business getting to market with their new ideas, we're not very popular. We're not seen as part of the solution. For me, if I were a change manager in a big organisation, I would want the business to think Stuart is the guy we go to when we want to get change implemented to support new business direction. I don't want them to think Stuart's the guy who always puts obstacles in the way and slows us down when we're trying to do something new in the business. And most change managers, unfortunately, the business see in the latter way. They're in the way, they're not part of the solution, as seen by their customers. I'm generalising a bit, but that's kind of market trends and what we're tending to say. Anybody recognise this diagram? It comes from, I think, chapter 8 of the ITIL Service Transition book. And it shows an example of one possible path through all of the ITIL processes during a typical transition. It's not the only path through, but it's a typical path to go through ITIL Service Transition. Now, if you don't have a lot of automation, and you're very reliant on people, and you've got that sort of number of steps, what's the likely impact on your transition in terms of speed, in terms of success? You may well achieve your success goals, but it's quite hard to be really, really fast when you've got a lot of manual steps. It's really hard. And with a lot of manual steps, people make mistakes. Can't be helped. So I'll come back to talk about this a little bit later. There's no test on this at the end of the day, and I don't expect you to memorise it. I just want you to think about the complexity of going through a big service transition, the way we describe in the ITIL book. Here's my summary of what you actually need to do in managing a big transition. You've got to plan what you're going to do, build it and test it, deploy it, and please, please, please do some sort of a review afterwards. The number of people I see making enormous changes and not doing a review. And I ask them about their change success rate, and they say, oh, it's 98%. And I say, how do you find a change failure? And they say, well, we had a catastrophic loss of service after we put it in. For me, I categorise changes as successful, it delivered what it was supposed to, and it didn't cause any incidents, but it overran in terms of resources or time. That's a change failure. It caused an incident. That's an even worse change failure. It didn't cause an incident, it didn't overrun its resources, but it failed to deliver the business value it was meant to. That's a change failure. If you don't do a change review, how on earth do you know whether your change succeeded or not? You'll be marking lots of things as successful change, when actually there were dismal failures. Each step you have some kind of change authorisation and you update the configuration management data. If you're doing all that, you're probably not doing a bad job of managing your transitions. So I want to move on to some of the things that I think are changing, that are new, that you need to think about. And the first one is cloud services. How many people have got some sort of internal or external cloud for some, at least, of the services they use? That's lower than I would have guessed. That's maybe 25% of the people in the room. I was expecting it to be slightly more. So the big change we get with cloud, whether it's infrastructure as a service or platform as a service or application as a service, I don't care. Whichever of those you're doing, what you end up with is much, much, much faster deployments. Where in a traditional project, that sometime the project would go to IT and say, oh, we need a big server and a big database and 3 terabytes of storage. And IT would say, oh, yeah, all right, you'll have that in about 3 months. Not unusual with big projects 10, 20 years ago. Nowadays, it's very much, yes, we can deploy that tomorrow, or the whole thing's automated and it happens in minutes. That means that many, many things that used to be change requests become either a standard change where you just follow through the flow, or even a service request where the whole thing's just automated off the back of a standard menu system. The other thing you need to think about as soon as you move to this sort of environment is very carefully distinguishing between your virtual things and your physical things, and even more, distinguishing between a CI type and a CI instance. We're familiar with the term CI? A configuration item, a server, a disk, an application. So, if you're in a cloud environment, you may have a CI type or big database, and that comprises servers, storage, networking, a whole set of infrastructure, and a database software, a whole set of stuff. And you might be able to deploy a big database in 5 minutes, because they're all the same. The testing you do once, you do the big test of, is this a good, solid, big database to deploy? So for the CI type, big database, you do a huge amount of design effort and testing effort. Each time you deploy it, all you need to do is check that what you've deployed is the right thing. It was meant to be a big database, it is a big database and it's got all the right components. So you need to distinguish between managing the type of thing, big database. Now we're going to do ginormous database, new thing. You're going to need a whole load of new design, end-to-end thorough testing before we deploy the first one. But after that, you deploy lots more quite quickly because they're all cookie cutter, the same as each other. The thing that doesn't change when you move to cloud, you've still got to support the rate of change needed by the business, but it might be easier. You've still got to minimise negative impact, and again, it might be easier because most of what you're doing is deploying well-known things. And you've still got to test things before you deploy them. But again, you do the big test once, and then each deployment is just a little test of has it been deployed correctly. Brings us on to Agile. Agile and service transition, I've been told by lots of people, are not good bedfellows. They don't work well together. Agile people hate service management people. They get in our way. They slow down our work. Those service management people are responsible for us not responding to business needs. And then you get the other side of this, the service management people saying those Agile people are total idiots. They're constantly trying to deploy things that aren't properly tested, they're putting stuff out full of bugs, they don't pay attention to the processes, they're not interested. Who do I agree with? Neither of them. They're all wrong. Agile is just a development methodology. It's a way of going about creating new services, new applications. The bottom line with Agile is you define what's effectively called a minimum viable product. Instead of trying to develop and deliver the whole solution over a 3-year period and then say, it was still what you wanted, wasn't it? Right up front, you sit with the business and say, what's the absolute bare minimum we can develop and deliver that will actually have some value to you? And then you develop that, and you get it down to something you can do in a few weeks. It's not the whole of the solution they want, it's the bare minimum thing that will give them useful functionality. And then once you've done that, and they've played with it, and they've thought about was it really what they wanted, and maybe given you some feedback about how it would be better done slightly differently. Now you say, right, what's the next set of features you want? In fact, typically, you have a whole set of features that the business would like, and you have a product manager who's prioritising these. And then each sprint, which is a period of 2 to 4 weeks where you develop something, you just do the minimum functionality that will give something of value to the customer. So instead of trying to do the whole of everything and taking 3 years about it, a few weeks for each development cycle, and get something out there that the business can look at. What does it change? You've now got to have service transition that supports frequent small releases. If your process requires 4 weeks for approval of a change, and every sprint takes 4 weeks, it ain't going to work. Even if you need a whole week to review and approve a change, that might be too long if there's sprints coming along all the time. We do need to somehow get the testing automated and get that automation into the software lifecycle. And I'll be talking quite a bit about testing. But the things that service management still needs to offer in an agile environment are making sure we support the rate of change the business needs, and it's typically a different rate of change. Minimising the negative impact and making sure things are being tested before they go live. We have to do it, but we might have to do it differently. Brings me on to DevOps. If Agile is methodology and tools and software development, DevOps is attitudes, behaviour and culture that support really fast and efficient deployments. It's a whole collaborative culture between development and operations. In the extreme case, you have a DevOps team that owns a release of your product, all the way from requirements through to retirement. And that might be quite a short life. It might be, we did the requirements, 4 weeks later we deployed, we supported it till 3 weeks after that it was retired because the next version was going in and the next team was following us up. And you can have a single DevOps team that owns the whole life cycle of and then that team goes back to the next release. So more traditionally you do it with separate development and operations teams, but a lot more overlap between them, and I've got a bit more about that on the next slide. We get the operations staff involved much earlier in the life cycle, talking to developers about how we're going to manage and support this thing when it goes live. We don't wait till it goes live and then say, oh, how are we supposed to back it up then? We don't wait till it goes live and then say, what sort of monitoring would it be good to have for this new service? You get development, operations people involved really, really early on, and ideally part of the development team. And you get development staff involved much later, in the life cycle. It does wonders for the knowledge and understanding of development people if you phone them at 2 o'clock in the morning and say it just went there. It changes their attitude towards incident management and towards implementation of what they could use if they get the 2 o'clock phone call and have to work out what on earth happened. I won't read the bottom 3 bullets, they're the same as the previous slide. You've still got to looking at it. Now, I've talked about methodology in Agile. I've talked about attitudes, behaviour and culture in DevOps. I guess we need to speak about technology as well. And for me, the tools and technology in this big new world are mainly around continual integration, continual deployment. Continual integration is the idea that every time somebody finishes work on a software module, or even if they haven't finished, if they get to a check-in stage, it immediately gets integrated into a build and tested. So you don't have like a weekly build of all this week's work that takes overnight and then you test it the next week. You typically have nightly builds or even 10 times a day builds if that's what it takes. Every time a piece of software is ready to be checked in, you immediately check it in and run your whole suite of tests. That's continuous integration. What's the value of it? You find what's wrong quicker and earlier. You get automated and instant testing of work that developers are doing, so that whilst it's still fresh in their mind, they can immediately fix it. Continual deployment is really shocking for service transition people. It's the idea that as soon as the integration test is complete, remember that was automated and potentially many times a day, it's automatically deployed into the production environment. There are organisations out there doing the most shockingly high rates of change using this sort of methodology. I think Netflix do up to 100 changes a day. You have to automate your life cycle. You can't do this sort of thing manually. And you must have a test environment that's as close as possible to your production environment. And actually, there's a really easy way of achieving that with modern technology and modern services. We have something which is typically called infrastructure as code. Have we come across that one? It's this cracking good idea, I love it, that if you think about a modern virtualized environment, and you say, I want a server that looks like this, and storage that looks like that, and network looks like that, that's just a script. The developers develop the hardware the same way as they develop the software. It's code. When you check it in, you're not only checking in the software build, you're checking in the actual configuration to which it will be deployed as part of the check-in. It all gets tested together and it's all ready to be deployed together. And your test environment isn't like production, it's the script that creates production. It's a fantastic approach. You really can get very high rates of change deployed like this, whilst you keep supporting the rate of change, minimising the negative impact, and testing everything before deployment. But now it's all automated. You don't have to have a cab. What you have to have is a whole set of checklists which you can automate within your tools. So you still do the same things, but many, many more of them are automated. Am I talking too fast? So, let's talk about how you can make your testing more effective. I've talked about the automation of testing. You can automate your whole end-to-end testing. And because it's automated, that means you can keep improving it, you can keep adding things into it, you can keep refining it. You can fully test your deployment and backout. If your deployment is fully scripted, and your backout is fully scripted, then that can either be handed over to a team that's going to deploy it, or it can be automatically pushed into, it can be deployed in the test environment, backed out of the test environment, and you can make sure that worked all right. And then if those have both gone all right, you can run it into the production environment in the same way. One of the things I quite often see with Agile development is something called feature flags. Are we familiar with feature flags? I see a lot of nodding over there. You could have delivered this presentation from the look of it. So, people talk about backout, but actually, most organisations don't back out changes that go wrong. They try to fix forwards. Why do they do it? There's all sorts of things that go horribly wrong when you try to back out changes. There's all sorts of complexities. It's not as simple as it sounds. I'll give you a story in a minute of one that went horribly wrong. You'll recognise it. What you do with a feature flag is you say to developers, you're developing a new feature, just give me a configuration flag to turn it off. That's fantastic. Now I can deploy the software turned off. I can enable it for a group of pilot users or initial deployment users. They can check it out, make sure it's working for them. If it's not, I can turn it off again. Don't need to back it out, just turn it off. And you can have feature flags for everything you push out. Because each Agile release is relatively small, we can just turn it off. I was going to tell you a story about a backout that went wrong. Anybody familiar with the rather sad story of what happened with NatWest and a number of banks with their financial systems a few months ago when nobody knew how much money they had for about a week? Do you know what caused that? Would you be surprised to know it was a poorly tested backout plan? Here's the story of what happened. I know it wasn't an Agile environment, but I think it's an interesting lesson for all of us about backup. So they were using a batch scheduler to run thousands of overnight batch jobs, a good old-fashioned bank system. I bet a lot of us are familiar with them, I know them, where every night you close the books, you run your overnight batch, which takes about 8 or 9 hours and only just fits into the backup window. When I worked for HP, we loved these customers because they always had to buy the biggest, fastest servers we made to run their overnight batch. And then you open everything again in the morning, so the processing can continue. And you have these really complicated batch schedulers that work all the dependencies between these tens of thousands of overnight jobs that do all the reconciliation and the actual transfer of money between accounts and all that stuff. So, third-party, commercial off-the-shelf batch scheduler had a really minor upgrade. Change request went in, we've done it hundreds of times before, low risk, yeah, approved, implemented. Overnight batch starts, it goes horribly wrong. So they back it out. Shouldn't have been a problem, back it out, carry on running on the previous version. Unfortunately, the person who backed it out didn't do it right because they hadn't tested what they were doing to back it out. As well as removing the new version of the software, they accidentally removed the database that told the batch scheduler what batch jobs to run and in what order and what the dependencies were. Not, you think, a problem because they've got nightly backups, they just restored it from the previous night backup, so they've now got their batch scheduler database back. Unfortunately, at this stage, nobody had mentioned it outside the 3 or 4 operators that were dealing with a minor change. At this stage, they suddenly realised some batch jobs have run out of the tens of thousands that run every night, and others haven't. And nobody knows which jobs have run and which ones haven't. And the only one to tell is to look through every single piece of data and try and work out what happened and what didn't. And that is 5 days' work. During which nobody knows how much money they've got in the bank. So do, please test your backup plans. And ideally, fix forward feature flags so that you don't get grief. So, why? Why am I saying to you, think about Agile, think about DevOps, think about cloud, and focus service transition on the important things? Rate of change, reducing risk. The bottom line is, if we get this right, you will be able to do more changes more quickly with a higher success rate and lower risk. If you think we're good enough, we don't need any of this stinking new stuff, it's worked for us for the last 20 years, is good enough, I promise you your competition are doing this now. Guarantee it. I guarantee you that somewhere somebody else is using Agile, is using DevOps, is using continual integration, is using continual deployment on services similar to some of the services you run. Not every service. As I said, last week, talked to people from the Bank of England. We've got our solid core financial system. We are not interested in making lots of changes. What we're interested in is not losing lots of money. I understand, and probably the stock exchange is quite similar. Although even those organisations have got some services for which this is suitable. The point is, if you say, this is not right for me, I don't need it for any of my services, then you're taking away a potential business advantage from your customers, and somebody else is giving that business advantage to their customers who are competitors of yours. So whether you're an internal IT department and you're taking away a business benefit, or you're a service provider and you're not keeping up with the market, in the long run it's going to be your job that's at stake. We can't afford to ignore this stuff. You know, from an IT point of view, faster time to value, increased success rate, all that, I'm not going to read the projects out. They're patently obvious. If you can do more changes more quickly with lower failure rate, it will be better for you and for your business and for your customers and for their business. It enables us to enable our customers to succeed. And service transition has always been about enabling us to enable our customers to succeed. So, here comes the hard bit. What changes should you make to your service transition processes to support the world that's coming? Sadly, there aren't any easy answers. I wish there were. I wish I could say to you, you just have to change the change management process into the change facilitation process that has got these 3 extra bits and then it will all work. It doesn't work like that. The first thing you need to do is talk to your customers on individual service basis, not at a big picture level, but for each of the services that you offer, what is the right balance between agility and stability for this service? It won't be the same for every service. There may be some where they'll say to you, what's critical for that one is the stability. There may be others where they'll say, actually that one, it really needs agility and we can take a bit of downtime. And there'll be some that are balanced and in between. Don't assume you know. Go and talk to them. Why? 2 reasons. Firstly, because you will be wrong on some occasions. And secondly, because when you start asking these questions, you start engaging the customer in things they care about. It's really good as IT to go and talk to our customer about what's important to them and get them to talk to us about what's important to them. It's how you engage customers. Once you've got a feel for that, is anybody here from a development environment? Right, go and talk to your ops people. Understand how this stuff looks to them. The rest of you, go and talk to your development people. Understand their perspective. Understand how they're working, why they're working that way, how you can facilitate what they do better. Next thing to do is to simplify your processes. I guarantee that your processes have got unnecessary steps in and have got things that aren't very efficient in. How can I guarantee it? Because every place I've looked at the processes has had. Processes tend to accrete extra steps over time to deal with odd situations that happen once. It says they integrate process from requirements through projects and development to operations. So one of my customers actually did that. They put in a single process owner for the whole development life cycle, all the way from requirements through to operation. Single process, single tools. There were separate process managers, so the person who owned software development and the person who owned service desk and the person who owned operations were completely separate functionally, but they had one process owner responsible for process design, process interfaces, tool design, tool implementation. What that meant was that whenever a change request was needed, it was a click of a button because all the correct artifacts were already created in the right places in the right format. It meant things flowed through the processes. Most of us have very separate software development and operational processes, and there's a lot of extra make work because of that, where it doesn't flow. When I say simplify processes, so what one of my customers did, I loved this, they listed all the different steps of their change management process in detail, 120 steps or whatever it was, and they categorised each one. Some of them were marked customer value. That meant a result of this step is the creation of real value for a customer of the business, an end customer. Some of them marked business value. It meant a result of this step is creation of real value for my business. Some of them marked IT value. The result of this step is something of value to IT. And a surprising number, they marked no value. If we didn't do this, we don't understand what the cost would be. And then they eliminated almost all of the no-value steps and a surprising number of the IT value steps, and they've shrunk the process down to fewer than half the steps it used to have, and therefore better than double the speed it used to have. You have to do that before you automate the process. Never try to automate a complex process. Make it simple and then automate it. And then don't automate everything. Only automate things that are well understood and simple. If you try and automate something complex, it will go horribly wrong on you, I promise. But automate what you can. The big thing to understand, if you want to move to a more agile, quicker, faster, more responsive service transition, is the big changes are not in the tools and they're not even in the process. They're the attitudes and behaviour and culture of your people. If you've got a cab whose job is to say no, I was sitting in somebody's cab last week. There were 20 people in that room, all of them had the power to say no, and not one of them had the authority to say yes. That's culture. Again, a different one of my customers changed the change management process, because they had one like that. They changed it round. They said, for every change, we are going to identify a single person to authorise it. That person will be accountable. What do we mean by accountable? I talked earlier about how do we measure a change. Did it come in with the right resources? Did it come in the times we said? Did it deliver the value we said? Did it cause incident? That person who authorised the change is going to get measured on the success of their changes. How many people measure their CAB people on change success rate? Did you authorise changes that went wrong? So that one person now, you only need one sign-off for the change, but they're going to get measured on it. What behaviour do we get from them? They check, they make sure. They talk to other people. If they don't know, they get the input they need. They take responsibility. They fill in the checklist themselves, but if they need to speak to the InfoSec people, they do. Another one of my customers had a brilliant idea that when a change was logged, if it came out as low risk on the matrix, and low risk, low impact, which is most of their changes, most of our changes, and it fitted into a change window, and it wasn't a critical server, then the person who requested the change became the change approver. They put an extra step into this. If within the last 12 months you've had a failed change, then it goes to the change manager. It takes a lot longer. This extra step is back to accountability, isn't it? If you know you can approve your own change, but if it goes wrong, you lose the right to approve your changes, what behaviour does that generate? You take responsibility. That's what I mean by attitudes, behaviour and culture. Think around how you can make people take responsibility for change, success and speed, rather than cover their arses because 20 people have all said yes. Well, none of them said yes, but nobody said no. Some books you might like to read. I'll go through them very briefly. The Phoenix Project. Anybody read it? Familiar with it? Anybody familiar with Eli Goldratt, The Goal? Theory of Constraints. So, for those of you who know that, this is a very similar style of book. It is a novel about implementation of DevOps in an IT department. It's a basic, simple, easy read story. Bit fantasy, bit happy, but you know, it gets the principles across really nicely. Anti-fragile. I didn't talk much about anti-fragile. I skipped some of the testing slide, but I'm about to run out of time, so it's lucky I did. The idea of anti-fragile things is, in the old days, we had either fragile things that kept breaking, or we had fortress stuff that we built to be solid, like a brick outhouse. And the trouble with that is the more you build it up and the more solid you make it, when it goes wrong, the worse it is. Nobody's ever seen it go wrong before. Nobody knows how to fix it. Nobody knows how to diagnose it. Nobody understands the complexity of it because of the many layers you built in. Anti-fragile is a third leg on the stool, if you like. It's not fragile, and it's not solid. Anti-fragile is it's built to fail and recover. Anti-fragile is we recognise that no matter what we do, it will fail eventually. So we are going to be able to recover it really quickly, we're going to be able to fix it really quickly, or we're going to make sure it has the minimum business impact if it fails. And that goes with things like Chaos Monkey. We come across Chaos Monkey? This is a Netflix one. It's brilliant. Netflix have got an application that runs in their environment that randomly causes failures of random components because they build it anti-fragile. That way, they'll know if it's not anti-fragile because things are always failing. And at Netflix, you can guarantee they're always failing because Chaos Monkey's going around failing them. You can get the code, it's freely available, open source. You laugh because you wouldn't dare put it in your environment, would you? If you build an anti-fragile solution, you have the confidence to know that turning things off and disconnecting things won't hurt your customer. One of my customers was a mobile phone company. Interesting, we were talking about that before. And they had a new billing system. And the billing system was fixed into the switches. So if the billing system was down, then they were going to disconnect lots of phone calls within not very, very long and not be able to connect new phone calls. I won't comment on the design, but that's how it was designed. So I worked with them and with their software vendor, and the solution we came up with was no matter what failed, we would inject a new working component within 250 milliseconds. And we designed it to do that, and it all worked. And we could turn anything off. So you can do it for big, solid services as well as for, a mobile phone billing system is quite a big sort of environment. We're not talking about a website here. If I can do it for a mobile phone billing system, you can do it for most of your services. It just takes planning and design. The lean startup, that's if you want to understand a little bit better about minimum viable function, minimum viable product, then have a look at the lean startup, which is all around that area. Kanban, a technique heavily used in Agile. I use it for my personal to-do list. It's a way of managing work in progress. If you're familiar with theory of constraints, you'll know a lot about work in progress. If not, I recommend theory of constraints, but that's a separate thing. It's a way of managing work in progress so that you maximise the speed through wherever your constraint point is to get maximum workflow, and continuous delivery is what it sounds like. I recommend reading these. I will warn you, anti-fragile, if you don't understand maths, stop about halfway through the book. It's too hard to read. But the first half's easy. That's me done. I'm almost on time. I'm happy to take questions. I've kind of gabbled at you so you can get a word in edgeways. And if we take Ivor's time out with questions, then you probably didn't have much to say anyway. Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, we've got time for a couple of questions, and then we'll have some more time later on, right?
Anybody feeling shell-shocked?
With the ISO 20,000 update, when they introduced, I can't remember the snappy name for sort of big change.
Yeah.
But it was change and transition of new or change services.
Yeah. Introducing new or change services
Design
already.
and transition of new and change services.
Yeah, it's the worst name in the world for anything, to sell it to people. But I don't see that fitting in with Agile or DevOps really, because that's kind of managing big stuff.
I think it still can. In ITIL we have the concept of, it wasn't a change request, what was it called, Ivor, remind me? I'm sorry, my brain's gone blank. Change proposals, which kind of match up with that. The thing is, within Agile, you still have the big project, but you then say, right, what can we deliver in a few weeks out of this project? You have a lot of course correction, but still, if you say, let's have a whole new finance system for the bank, you know that over time that's going to cost you £3 million over the next 2 years, but you don't wait for the 2 years to be up and then deliver it and say, is that still what you wanted? Within 4 or 5 or 6 weeks, you start delivering the first bit of functionality and get the feedback loops working. So it's not saying you can't do big projects, it's saying if you're doing big projects, break them up into bite-sized pieces where you can demonstrate quick value and quick feedback loops. And I might ask the lady there within her mobile environment, do you do big projects using Agile?
Yeah, we do. But we split them up. So I think the one thing that you didn't mention that I think actually is implicit in that is understanding your level of risk in doing it. And I think that that's the most complex thing in doing all of these things, is that people on both sides, that sort of, from a change point of view, they balance up the risk of deploying with not deploying and what that means for a customer. and that sort of people who want to deploy, whether that's from a DevOps environment or a straightforward release process, understand the risk of putting it in and it going wrong. So yeah, we do, but we do them in phases generally.
Yeah.
We are also doing continuous deployment as well, and DevOps. So basically everything you're talking about, we do at once. So we didn't cough it up one day, it kind of came along, but and that's actually why we don't have a cab, because we automate all of our stuff, so that's more of why it is. And the changes are very small and very easy to back out.
I'm going to be your brain. Anybody else got any?
You talk about automation and testing. I'm just trying to sort of get my head around how you developed a new form or something for the application, and you're then how are you going to sort of...
For me, the approach I love the best is the one they call test-directed design. And what you do in that is you take the requirements, and based on the requirements, you don't develop code, you develop tests. And then once you've got the test, you say to the developers, you've got to pass that. I love test-directed design. It works really well with these environments.
And if you link that to your release process, basically our developers can't release code that hasn't passed their tests that they find in the first place. And we have a separate autonomous testing team who are there to go, hey, your test doesn't really do what it says you do, so we keep them separate as well.
Right, okay. Well, if anyone's got any more questions for Stuart, then we'll have a little bit of time at the end anyway, but can I just thank Stuart for really interesting talk. Hand over to Ivor Macfarlane.
Any possible reason for wearing a tie? Just put a microphone. After that fact-filled little journey through the transition, I can guarantee you an almost content-free presentation. As Stuart said, I was involved in the service transition board, but it's incredibly boring stuff, so I much prefer to talk more about more waffly stuff. Right, like that, for example. So, point says, Stuart kept mentioning, we all know IT and IT service management is about people, process and technology. But most places actually go, it's about technology and process, and damn it, there was another thing. So I spent a lot of my time recently trying to talk about the people part of it. And not just your own. I told you. So forward is on the left, it just seemed wrong to me. It's obviously to be considered in Arabic terms. Right. Three-legged stool that I think Stuart already mentioned, people, process, technology. Most of the organisations I see have got a 1.5-legged stool. And then they have to employ 50 people to keep the damn thing upright. I asked a question on a webinar recently. The webinar was about, does IT service management fit into IT? And that's the kind of picture I think. My background is that I came from service management into IT, not from IT into IT service management. I got pulled into IT when they decided to computerise the warehouses, and I got pulled in as a storage expert. So I came back from a group called Services Groups. I've done services for a long time, so I see it differently. And I asked this question, there are only two answers possible. You either work in IT or you work in service management. If you have to choose one, which one do you choose? And if I'd done that 5 or 6 years ago to the audience, I think most people would have gone for IT. It was about 50-50 this time. I was pleasantly surprised that 50% of about 400 odd people on the webinar actually voted for service management, not IT, if they had to choose. So I count that as progress. And IT's got big. Back even when I started in IT, it was possible to know about IT, which is why the BCS is called the British Computer Society. Back in those days, it was possible to know about computing. It isn't anymore. It's like being in medicine. You know, the phrase, nobody claims they work in medicine anymore. They'll say they're a doctor or a drug researcher. They're all in medicine, very different jobs. Trying to make the point, IT service management is different from IT. Not better nor worse necessarily, but different. I found this slide. I'll come back to the words in a moment. There's an awful lot of truth in there. If anybody thinks they've got a job that they could explain in 2 minutes to a 3-year-old, they probably shouldn't be in the BCS. I thought I'd changed it a little bit to make it more relevant. One of the things we did in a project years back was I can name them because they went bankrupt. An insurance company called Independent Insurance, and we were putting software tool in. And I came up with a relationship that I wanted to call the cock-up-ability factor of the job. But I was overruled, and they called it the short-term damage coefficient. And what we discovered was the less people were paid, the more power they had to damage the company quickly. The chief executive could destroy the whole company, and indeed he did destroy the whole company by getting his costing process wrong, but it took a long time. People with the simpler jobs, the ones that can actually be explained, can actually damage the business much more quickly than the senior management can. The CIO can destroy a company, but it'll take them a while. The person on the service desk or the online sales system, the telephone sales support system, can do real damage to a business very quickly. And we need to think about that when we talk about prioritising things and very important services and damage points. The words are about what I talked about before, just about the range of IT. You know, I know my day job is in IBM. Large parts of IBM are into how many terabytes can we get on a pinhead these days. Or the latest big thrust that IBM is doing is about fancy words for it. We call it Watson. Basically, it is thinking computers. I wasn't very popular by suggesting that Watson and computers that can win on game shows are a necessary step in James Cameron's vision of the future as set out in Skynet and Terminator. But it is. Yeah, we're going down that road. We've got to be careful where we go. Other people are worried about programming and hardware. Some other people in IT are worried about what the customers want. The important message that gets missed sometimes is because we need to worry about customers doesn't mean we don't need the technicians and the geeks and the people who can put nanobytes on a pinhead. Without that, we go backwards as well. It's a question of getting this whole spectrum working together. It's not about throwing the technology out in favour of the service management. I live on the service management end of it, but it's important we see the whole spectrum. And the last bit is interesting about dealing with issues in IT. A lot of people like to deal with them when they happen. Because that's what we joined IT for, wasn't it? To play with the tools. Anybody join IT not to play with the tools? Interestingly, we're now trying to move to getting things fixed before they break, which is what we want as customers. We take an example here. So, your second or third line deep support, clever, technical, massively knowledgeable person. And the systems go down at about 11 o'clock in the morning. And the boss comes in and says, you three, fix it. Drop everything else, fix it. And these three guys get together, probably three guys get together. And they start taking things to pieces and they worry at it and they look at it and they come up with an idea. At about 12:15, they think they've understood what's happened. They cobble together a solution by 1 o'clock. They put it in place. They all look smug for 2 minutes till it falls on its backside again. They think, oh my God, they keep working. By 2 o'clock, they really understand what went wrong. 2:30, they've got a solution built, quick test, put it in place. By 3 o'clock, everything's working again. These three guys go home that evening really happy. That was a great day. It's what I got into this business for. Wow, we had a challenge, we worked as a team, we solved it. That was wonderful. 3,000 other people go home 2 hours late. The dinner's already in the door. They've had a miserable day. Bloody IT, what do we pay them for? System went down at 11 in the morning, 4 hours it took to get it back. You know, and we're still not right. I'm going to have to go in at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning to try and catch up. If it's your company, how often do you want those 3 people to be happy? Might be nice guys, but you want them bored out their tiny minds. Just understand the spectrum we've got and the effect that might have on some people as well. Service management now is the front line. These clever guys that you must have at the back. I spent a lot of time in prison. I better say that differently. I used to work for the prison service, and very young, and it was interesting. I learned a lot of stuff in the prison. One of the things you learn is that the prison officers walking around grumbling about being bored, and that's exactly what the governor wants to hear. If his officers aren't looking bored, he's got it wrong. And that's a service management issue you should be looking for. Service management's been around a long time. It didn't just come from IT. If you think IT invented disciplines like configuration management and capacity management, you think about building the pyramids without configuration management and capacity management. Wouldn't have worked. These are very old disciplines. I like this picture because it's a bit of a mess of old technology and some rather newer stuff. I also like it because I took it from the IBM car park in Cairo. It's as near as I got to anything interesting in Cairo. To be fair, I had to walk to the far side of the car park and put the thing on full telephoto and then crop a tiny bit out of the middle of the picture. But it is taken from the IBM car park. We are in an engineering business. There's an awful lot we need to go and look at in engineering and learn. We need to look at the skills that we've got that might help. The geek skills, I said, are important, but they're not going to help us in service management a lot of the time. We need to look for other skills. So the kind of people involved. Service managers. A great service manager is happy to be low profile because success is not fixing it. Success is not having it break. They're oriented to other people's hopes and desires. They want the customer to be happy. And they tend not to necessarily need the glory. A lot of it is about, you see all those things that didn't happen yesterday. That was my fault. It's a different attitude to the traditional IT approach, which is fiddlers and fixers. Any excuse to take something to pieces is to be welcome. They're firefighters at heart. One of the other things I learned in my time in the prison back in the last century was that the single most common profession of men in jail for arson was firemen. More firemen set fire to buildings than any other profession. Because they joined the fire service to ride the big red truck and to ring the bell and to rescue damsels in distress and cats up trees. And when no damsels need rescuing, there's a temptation to go out and set fire to buildings to get the adrenaline rush that they join the fire service with. The same thing happens in IT, in my opinion. And the other thing, which actually the picture of the space shuttle is one I used a long time because somebody not a million miles away from me at the moment once looked at the space shuttle and said, oh, that's that thing that goes up and down to the space station, isn't it? Really boring. Because it's been around since before she was born. And we have to understand the new normal. And it was interesting, I heard a keynote talk 2 weeks ago in the Pink Elephant Conference from Chris Hadfield, who was the commander of the space station. And he said exactly the same thing. He had a picture of a child watching the shuttle. And he said, this child believes that is old-fashioned. And it is old-fashioned. And we have to understand some of this. There's a range of ages in the room. I find it incredibly difficult not to get excited about things that are actually already old-fashioned. And I have to remember to do that sometimes. So one of the things we need to get through with our customers sometimes is remember what might be the norm for them. It's not something to write home about. So service management, the great service manager is invisible. You don't want to see them. It's a bit like your doctor. How often do you want to see your doctor? Would you be quite pleased never to see the inside of the surgery ever again? You can run into them over the artichokes in Sainsbury's or something, that's okay. But I don't want to be in the surgery. Although a little bit of me wants to go and get my first free prescription now I'm over 60, but I'm fighting with that. Feeling entitled. I did a presentation all around great service management being invisible a few years back for ITSMF Canada. And I sent my slides in, and the first slide just said, the perfect service manager, nothing else on it. And they sent the slides back saying, we think you made a mistake. You sent us a blank slide by accident, so we deleted it. So I asked a number of my daughters for some help. I needed a picture to demonstrate invisibility, and she found me that. Which I thought, for what sounded like an impossible challenge, was a pretty good response. But it really is interesting, you know, that's the definition of invisibility. If somebody says, oh yeah, that's a nice disguise, it isn't a good disguise. And if people can see what you're doing and how fast you're paddling underwater, it's not good. And the things that customers these days perhaps shouldn't be seeing is, are we on a cloud? Is our IT on a cloud or is it in-house? Why do you need to know? What's it got to do with you as a customer? The other examples are, you go to a movie and you come out from the cinema saying, do you know, I believe that's the best film editing I've ever seen. It was a crap film. If you notice the editing, that is not the purpose. If you come out saying, oh, I really fell for that poor guy in the end, that's better. Yeah. And are we on a bridge or a road or where are we? Just travel it. And the important point, why I summarise like that, the way I've summarised that is to say the customers should be able to treat the service you deliver, IT or otherwise, as magic. The slides are out of order, excuse me, I'll come back to that. 99.9, no, I'm 100% certain it's my fault. Any suitably advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. We all believe in magic. You may not know you believe in magic, but trust me, you believe in magic. So there's an idea I stole from Professor Ian Stuart. So I stole it from a professor, so it's got to be right, okay? And he talks about the magic cupboard. The picture on the left there is my magic cupboard. And you put dirty clothes in this magic cupboard. And you add this special sacrificial white powder that you get from the supermarket. And you set the magic prayer wheels to the right positions, and you press the magic button. And you come back in 2 hours, and the magic has worked, and the clothes are clean. Now you can believe that. All you can do is all the research and understand how washing machines work. How the agitation of the contra-rotating drum loosens the grip of the tomato ketchup on your cotton fibres, and how the long enzyme detergents do all that clever stuff. You can understand everything about it. It still takes 2 hours and they're no cleaner than if you believe in magic. So why bother? And if you analogize that to an IT service situation, if your business people have got the time to understand exactly how you're doing everything, then they've got time to get better at their own job. They don't need to know. You have the right to treat it as magic. And we all do treat things as magic, whether you believe it or not. So, people here understand IT because you're all clever BCS members, right? So if you understand IT, you understand Windows or iOS or whatever system you use. You understand every nuance of Windows. You understand the hardware that underpins it. We all do that, do we? We could all strip down a PC and put it back together again. And we all understand that thing in the middle, which is actually what makes IT work. That is a picture of the positioning of the electron cloud inside a silicon atom. This is bit over here is the electrons that have escaped from the potential energy well that they wouldn't be able to do if it wasn't for Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. That's how semiconductors work. You all knew that, because if you didn't know that, how can you possibly know about computers? Or did you just treat it as magic? Even Stephen Hawking, in The Brief History of Time, it's a great line, it says, at this point, you just have to accept that that's the way the universe is. And if it's good enough for Stephen Hawking, it's good enough for me. And the higher you can make that line of magic with your customers, the better a job you're doing to them. And if they don't want to believe in magic, it's probably because they don't trust you. Because something's gone wrong in the past. If they feel obliged to know how you do things, you can construe that as a lack of faith. So what you want to do is get them to trust you. Now, did I miss one out, didn't I? And this is the point, see why I talked about the bridge before. In IT terms, this is the application. This is the Pont de Gare in the south of France, built by the Romans 2,000 years ago, still there. Pretty impressive. It's not a service, it's an application. The service is a 36-kilometre canal that delivered fresh water to the centre of Nîmes. In fact, it delivered it to that basin there. That's where you measure success. No matter how good they got the bridge, if there's no water here, the whole thing's a failure. That Stuart was talking about. You judge whether the project works. Another HP story that I loved was years back, I had a guy presenting saying the cost of incidents has gone down to 25% of what it was 2 years ago. And we said, what the hell did you do that? You know, whatever it is, we want it. And he said, nah, it's a bit cheating. We redefined go live. In fact, we redefined pay the project manager their bonus point. Instead of saying the project's done when you go live and you pay the project manager their bonus depending on what it's cost. That's now deferred for 6 months. Anything that goes wrong in the first 6 months is costed and billed back to the project. And the project manager gets their bonus based on 6 months into the project, what it cost. So if they deliver it with faults, they muck their bonus up. Transform things. Just that one simple act.
That's what I've said about accountability before.
Yeah, it's that. We know the old story of the cathedrals in Europe with the major arch. It was tradition. You build an arch by building a wooden frame and then you put the stones around, you put the keystone on the top, take the arch away and the weight holds it there. The tradition was that the chief architect, or whatever they called them, stood underneath the arch when the wood came out. That was a requirement. That's accountability. ITIL is process focused. It's got a book in there called Continual Service Improvement, which is not about continual process improvement. And it annoys the hell out of me that we're still talking about process improvement. I'm doing it because they're paying me money, but I've just got some stuff to read where they're going process by process, and their target is to be a CMMI 3.5 in each process. So my picture is that that's a service, gets you from one side of the river to the other. Tell it's a river, it's got blue at the bottom. Those are the processes that hold your service up. And those are the bits we all worry about. Because if the process and the pier isn't big enough, the bridge will sag, yeah? The other thing that you should worry about is those ones. Why are you doing your process better than you need to? That is continual service improvement possibility by doing it worse. First time I used this slide was for a group of government CIOs in Canberra. They had exceedingly good lunch out of it. And I put this up and I said, well, the example I know from UK government, British Army, was Ivor Evans asked a question to his people, how many of these processing units do I need to support this workload? And they went away, 2 weeks later they came back with the answer of something like 7.53628. He said, you know, the damn things come in ones. How long would it have taken you to tell me I need 8? And I said, about an hour, but it wouldn't have been right, would it? It's 2 weeks of wasted time and money. Nowadays, you're giving people requirements based probably on a business prediction that's, with luck, plus or minus 20%. So any accuracy in that kind of area, more than 10% accurate, is just wasted effort. It's not going to be right. By the time you've done it, the business predictions changed anyway. Stuart says sometimes speed is more important. It's about knowing what good looks like. And brings us on to measurement. We measure things in IT. We're good at measuring things in IT. A traditional approach is to collect a lot of data, create reports because you've got the data, and then tell people that the reports are important because you've got them. Anybody done that? So, as I put it, find a number, make it bigger, feel smart, and relax. I'll come back to the example of that, but that's what we want to do. I think there's better things, and I scoured great literature for the phrase that summed up what I wanted, and I found it in Thomas the Tank Engine. The ultimate praise in Thomas the Tank Engine, the Fat Controller says, Thomas, you're a really useful engine. And I don't think we make enough of the word useful. It's the only measurement that really matters if you're in the service management business, not about IT. If you're delivering services, if they aren't useful, you're not delivering services. You're delivering something else. So we need the word useful rather than more. And I was doing a project for a well-known at the time integrated service management tool provider that was purchased by HP. And they wanted me to do a white paper, and they said, what we want is a paper that illustrates how we know what keeps the CEO awake at night, and that we're going to be there with him. And I said, no, you don't. You want a white paper that illustrates that if they buy your product, the CEO will sleep all night. The CEO doesn't want people to keep him company at 3 o'clock in the morning. Success is hearing your alarm clock go off, not the telephone. But they decided that's not what they wanted. They got somebody else to write one about what keeps the CEO awake at night. I don't know why they got bored. But to me, there's an enormous difference, an enormous kernel of truth in that concept. We are still much more interested in keeping the guy company at 3 o'clock in the morning when something exciting is happening. And a good friend of mine was, he was IT services manager for British North Sea Oil, and then BP Exploration when they got privatised. And it's interesting, he got promoted from being IT services manager. So he said that he was being sent to Houston. We said, oh, so what's happened? You're now IT manager. He said, no, I'm now services manager. And I thought that was pretty interesting. That they just saw IT services as one who was a bigger services guy. But we were saying to him that now you're at that kind of level, you must be getting called in the middle of the night and, all this stuff. He said, no, absolutely not. My attitude is, if there's an issue going on at 3 in the morning, the technical guys know what to do. It's no good calling me. I don't know about this. They will ring me at about 7:30. So I'm in there at 8 o'clock, and I field things when the senior customers start coming in. And they know that it's much more use having me in there at 7:30 in the morning awake than calling me in at 3 o'clock to get in the way. They want me fresh to deal with the customers. And I thought that was a very good perception of someone who understood he was a services manager first and an IT person second. And interestingly, he did come up as a programmer, but he grew out of it. And the other thing about measurement is, do we measure the right things? Which of these is the green car?
The green car.
Yeah, no, the green car's not a green car at all. The green car is 2.5 litre V6 multi-point fuel injection. All the technology in that is designed to get as much petrol through it as possible. I used to have that car. I left it behind with my first wife. Occasionally I miss the car. Don't tell your mother. The red car is my IBM company car. It's a Prius, actually, my previous red Prius. I'm on my second red Prius. So now I'm much greener than I used to be, yeah? Of course, I've now got a green car, the red one, keeping up with this. Actually, in the first year I had the Prius, I did 20,000 miles in it, and I did about 5,000 miles in the MG. I used much more petrol in the Prius than I did in the MG. So just looking at what we use is not the answer. It's the right answer to the wrong question. Which car does most miles to a gallon is the wrong question. The question is, how much petrol did you do last year? What's your carbon footprint? It's a bigger question. We don't ask the big questions because we start with the data. So instead of starting with the data and building it up, we should ask the big questions and work out what data we need to capture. But it's a much harder question. So, bigger is not always better. What is the availability requirement for the floodlighting at a major football ground?
Depends if you like football.
Yeah. We have to like football to be a shareholder, you want the money. The answer, of course, is they have to work if there's a match on in the dark. Doesn't matter what happens the rest of the time. You could deliver an availability of 0.1% and get it right. You could also deliver 99.9% and never get it right. There are other factors in play. Some of them are predictable. When do you need to grit the roads? When it's going to freeze? Well, could you give me a calendar for the next 12 months so I can plan it? Life's not like that. So some of these things are much harder to do than the old numbers-driven ones. And measuring the real effects. I was talking with James Finister of Tata, and we were talking about that, and he said his major contract, there's one measure that matters. Every 90 seconds, there should be a new Land Rover there. And if we've gone 92 seconds and there isn't a new Land Rover there, something's wrong. And his customer is only concerned about a new Land Rover every 90 seconds. If it's not there, it's Tata's fault because they got it wrong, because they've outsourced everything. So a very simple measure of success, and then it's the supplies issue. You start getting penalty clauses. So it can be quite simple. And your lost sales, or how many people have you killed in the last year? A guy called Joel Splam, I stole this from, and he runs the IT for a hospital in Chicago. And I said to him, in all innocence, what's your key business measure? And he said, we don't publish it, but our key measure is how many people did IT kill last year? The answer is not 0, too expensive. As long as they killed less people than they would have done without the IT, or killed less people than the year before, that's fine. It's a commercial business. They can't afford to make it totally full. And we kill people a lot these days with IT, we know it. I was doing a BS, it's an old story, BS 15,000 seminar in London. And you start these with the right questions. What time do you need to leave? This guy says, it'd be great if we could get away maybe 4:20 so I can get out before the traffic really starts to bite. Although if it's like it was the other Tuesday, it doesn't matter. And there was somebody sitting 3 desks along from him and said, yeah, I'm really sorry about that, I was tired. Work for Transport for London. Come back from lunch, I suspect a liquid lunch. And he yawned about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and he stretched his foot out under his desk and hit the off switch to the server that was under his desk, which is where they built the traffic light control system for central London, and it worked, so why would you want to risk moving it? So the whole central London traffic light system went off monitoring and back onto 2 minutes green, 2 minutes red. And London gridlocked, which we started off thinking was quite funny, to be honest. And then you realise he certainly killed people, because ambulances and police and other people were trapped in that gridlock system. Somebody who probably would have lived if the ambulance had got there didn't. Somebody who would have lived if the ambulance had reached the hospital on time didn't. Our IT kills people these days, and it isn't just the grandiose stuff and running the hospital. It's not difficult to kill someone with IT these days, because it's that fundamental. So, those are good measures to think about. Have you killed anyone lately? What I loved about Joel's approach was they were considered the biggest risk to the organisation by the audit team. And he said that's the best compliment there is. Because if they didn't trust us, there'd be alternatives in place. There was no paper store in the hospital he showed us around. There was just a PC in every room. If the systems failed, you didn't know what was wrong with the patient or what the dosage rate was or anything. So it's clearly a major risk, but it was a risk because they didn't need an alternative because they trusted him. So as far as he was concerned, the fact that they were identified as the biggest risk was the best compliment there was. And his staff were literally wearing badges that said, "We are your biggest risk," and a smiley face in it. And if your customers keep coming back with an expectation of outrageous improvements, that's a compliment, because it's based on what you've done before. If they don't have outrageous expectations of you, it's probably not a compliment. And this is again from Northwest Memorial Hospital. He changed the focus. He needs to know how many incidents are reported because it affects how many people he needs on the service desk and various capacity issues. What he cares about is significant business impact. The number of incidents over this 2-year period doubled. The business impact went down to 25% of what it had been before. And I asked him, what's the trick? What's the biggest secret? And he said, easy. We threw away the prioritisation rules, which had been based around how many users are affected and such like. And we put a team together to build new prioritisation, and we put 2 nurses on the team. And conversations went like, so that's really important because that affects 400 people. And this only affects 3 people. And the nurses would say, yeah, that means 400 people get their lunch late. This means you killed 2 of those people. And the prioritisation was built totally from a business perspective. Not numbers thought up by IT, but from the nurses. Biggest factory did was put 2 nurses in there.
Can I share a story with you?
You can, sir.
The best IT service manager I ever had the pleasure of working with was in a health trust. The previous job had been head of nursing. She knew bugger all about IT, but she knew what she wanted to deliver, she knew how to motivate people, and she knew how to measure.
Yeah. And she didn't have all the baggage that comes with being an IT person.
Right. And she was really good. I really rated her.
Yeah. The best problem manager ever was Teresa in the electricity supply board. Knew nothing about solving problems. Never solved a problem in her life. But she was the consummate office politician. She knew who to threaten, who to bribe, who to get drunk, who to flirt with. And you're talking about HP and Microsoft on this list, big issues. Their problems went up the scales because she knew how to manoeuvre people. And she was so good that they did what big companies do and they promoted her into something else and everything went down the pan. So, unexpected consequences. I haven't talked about get a number, make it big, but it's exactly about what Stuart was talking about. This is a story that we picked up doing some work for a multinational fuel company based in the Netherlands, but I'm not going to name it. And I was doing the project with a really, really classy service management consultant who also happened to be young and very attractive. And the 2 senior change managers we were talking to had noticed the latter, and that had somewhat clouded their eyes to the former. So they're trying to flirt with them, and they're trying to show off. And they say, no, you don't worry about us, don't need to worry about us, because we've got changes measured, and we've got targets for improvement for next year. We've got a 75% first-time success rate for our changes, and that's going to be 85% next year, and we're doing improvements to do it. And Candace just looked at them in the eyes. They were not looking at her in the eyes, but she looks at them and says, oh, that's interesting. Is that what they want? What do you mean? Well, do they want 85% done first time, or would they prefer to have just 70%, or maybe even less, but have them all done in half the time? What would be the most use for them as a business? And these guys looked at each other and went, well, I'm not sure we've actually asked them that exact question. And Candace just fluttered her eyelids at them and said, oh, I think perhaps one of you should. 2 very large Dutch egos just clapped in little quivering heaps on this. What we did our own research, and we discovered that Shell, like most oil companies, said the name, are in 2 halves. There's upstream, which is the bit on the left, finding finding places in the ground that might have oil, or drilling holes and sucking it out. It's dangerous. If you're going to change something, you need to make sure it's right first. If it goes wrong, you can kill people. Downstream is run by marketing, where they actually sell products made of oil. Like all marketing departments, they want changes yesterday, and if half of them don't work, who cares? So he says, no, you've got different approaches to different people. And the IT services manager we were working for went, that's interesting. If we thought that through 3.5 years ago, we might not have a corporate policy of maximising our shared infrastructure. Because now we just guarantee that we can never make anybody happy. You know, and as massive a consequence as that comes out of a simple question of realising your customers are not homogeneous. That's the only picture of a petrol station I could find that I'd taken. It's not probably illustrative of the things. Taken from a hotel window in Kent now. Yeah. So as I talked about, growing up's difficult. Availability percentages and response and repair times are actually easy to measure. Doesn't mean they're the right thing to measure. And just because the right thing to measure isn't easy doesn't mean that you don't have to solve the difficult question. So things are getting harder. Less to do with our equipment. And the more you get onto a cloud, the less you need to worry, as Stuart pointed out, about the traditional things. And the more you can actually worry about proper service management. So I think the effect of cloud is actually to illuminate real service management, not the capacity and configuration and component issues, but actually delivering the service and what it's for. And it's driven by other people's opinions, not IT opinions. Big message about that is that you can't do this from a supplier perspective. If the customer isn't willing to get involved, it will all go wrong. So once you get up to the knowledge-wisdom part of the data information knowledge-wisdom line, wisdom still involves people. You know, the pictures are about, you know, the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge is realising that a tomato is a fruit and not a vegetable. But wisdom is being aware of that, but not feeling tempted to put tomatoes in your fruit salad. That came to me from my third daughter. So yeah, without my daughters, I would be nowhere else in this. Some things cannot be outsourced, however much money you spend on it, because if the business and the customers don't get involved and start defining what good looks like to them, they will never get anything that looks good. You can't do it. And Stuart gave examples, and we've done examples in this. You cannot sit on the supplier side and think you know what's going to be right. You can only know what's actually right by going on the other side and asking. And we all do it. We're all customers. We all know how to be customers. And way too many people sort of hang their inner customer up on the hook when they get to work, and then go into supplier mode for the working day, and then go home and be customers again. We all know how to be customers. We just need to remember that sometimes when we're being suppliers as well. And we also need to focus to some degree on reality. This is a tooth fairy, by the way. And one of the issues I find in a lot of organisations is that it's what I call tooth fairy syndrome. You get guys who no longer believe in the tooth fairy or in Father Christmas, but they still believe what salesmen tell them. The three things are on a par, trust me. And I remember coming in as an implementation consultant, a specific example, who is going to be your configuration management librarian? Because this is a big organisation and we've just put a CMDB in. The sales guy didn't say anything about needing, staff to manage it. Do you believe in the tooth fairy? Question things. Customers need to get involved. But you need to be pragmatic. So think about what we see on television. And if you're into science fiction in film and television, and if you also read science fiction books, you may notice that teleportation is way more popular in the films and the TV than it is in the books. And the answer, and the reason why, is really simple. It's incredibly cheap. All you have to do is make the screen shimmer a bit, and Kirk and Spock are on the planet. To do it scientifically correctly, because they proved teleportation is not possible due to bandwidth issues, to do it scientifically correctly, you need little model shuttles and you need stop motion. It costs a fortune. Shimmering the screen doesn't get in the way of the story. It's what I call good enough for Sheldon, if you're into the Big Bang Theory. And if it's good enough for Sheldon, it's got to be good enough. It doesn't stop him enjoying the story. So why do you do something more? And it's like the capacity management issue. As suppliers, we get really interested in getting it, quote, right, instead of good enough. And a lot of the time we make things too right, and more right than the customer needs. So customer perspective can mean pragmatism, doing it well enough. If you're not into that kind of science fiction, exactly the same thing happens killing vampires. In Buffy, you just shimmer the screen, pile of dust. It costs about threepence. If you've watched True Blood, it costs a fortune to kill a vampire in True Blood. But if you're interested, go back and watch the first series of True Blood. And no vampires die visibly until the very end of the first series. Till they know that they were going to make enough money to justify it. And I guarantee if they hadn't had the viewing figures at the beginning, they'd die with a little shimmer of the screen and a pile of dust in True Blood as well. But it doesn't get in the way of the story either way. So why waste the money? And why waste money getting things too right? So that's really all I wanted to say. It's just a matter of looking in the right direction. If you can see that there is an antelope in there, once you need to know it, once you know it's there, you can see it. That's a tiny part of a bigger picture that I took. And I didn't know that antelope was there until 6 months later. And in my defence, there's a sodding great elephant on the bit that I've cut out. Which sort of distracts your attention a bit.
Is that the official elephant in the room?
That is the official elephant in the room. Oh, it was a wonderful post, I think it was Dago's posting. He says, oh, I just bought my friend an elephant. And he said, don't mention it. I bought him an elephant. Thank you, don't mention it. Yes, it was the official element, but it's not in a room. But, it's sometimes really hard because of our IT perspective. We came from an IT background. It is very hard to see what should be obvious because it's not what we're looking for. And that's really the message I wanted to say. That's all I needed to say. We do have some IBM giveaways. The advantage of not having gone self-employed is that I can steal, in this case, luggage tags from IBM. If you want one, do feel free to.
We've got 10 minutes or so. If you've got questions for either Stuart or Ivor, then we've got about 10 minutes. Okay.
Is it just human nature then that makes us so difficult to deal with people and focus on technology? It must be.
Well, think about it this way: there's a range of people. Yeah, I mean that's one of the reasons we evolved to be successful as a species because there's a range of people doing different skills. And if there's only one model of people, it wouldn't be anywhere nearly as effective. So we've got this range of knowledge, skills, and attitudes. The reason people are in IT is because they've got the skills that work in IT. It makes you attracted to it. Taking an IT person and putting them in marketing isn't going to work, and vice versa. So it is not accident that we end up in these roles. So we've got this kind of focus. It's an engineering attitude. The people who would have been tinkering with diesel engines, the Wright brothers, 120 years ago, are now tinkering with software because it's the same skill that comes forward. So it's a separation of skills and aptitude, I think. So we're sort of predisposed to look at how. And that's what it's about.
There's also some issues with organisational culture and how we measure and reward people. That things are changeable. It's not just human nature.
No.
If you measure people in particular ways, reward them in particular ways, encourage behaviours by how you talk to people, you get what you deserve.
I mean, we look at service desks these days. The philosophy that says you put a service desk in a place where you can get really cheap people and you pay them the smallest amount you can, drives you to have, what's the technical term for it, to have a crap service desk. You're driven by the way you do it. It's Dave Packard, wasn't it, the line? If you show me how you'll measure a man and I will tell you how he will behave. And that hasn't changed in several thousand years. But you can do it, but even with not everybody can do everything, but the metrics will make you go and ask the right people if you think you're going to suffer from not doing it.
And it doesn't have to be the formal metrics. I've worked in organisations where when something goes wrong, somebody has to be blamed. a very common culture. What happens? You never make improvements because nobody ever tells you the truth about what happened.
Let me tell you a General Electric story. They were idiots, so let's name and shame them here. I was there to try and persuade this part of General Electric to look at ITIL more seriously. So I spent 4 days working with the deputy CIO, and then we were going to brief his boss's direct reports. And one of the places I went to was their 3 or 4 weekly review meeting. And the CIO, who believed absolutely in blame culture, said, we have, first of all, there's 30 people in the room, another 30 on the phone. We had this massive outage. It cost $750,000. Whose fault was it? What happened? And the story was really clear. There was one guy who was responsible for this area, and that's where the failure had been. And he was on a walking holiday in the Appalachians, out of cell phone contact. There were 2 other people who could have had a good go at fixing it. One had worked in that area 2 years before, and one worked in like the adjoining, logically adjoining area. Both of them had the same attitude. If I touch that, I might probably fix it. But if I touch it and it gets worse, or it doesn't get better, I'm going to get blamed. If I stand back and say that's Fred's area, I won't get blamed. So the fact that it was a blame culture initially meant no one else would touch it. Eventually, a day or so later, Fred on the Appalachians walked within cell phone range and got a call telling him his holiday was over. Not deferred or postponed, but cancelled, get back here. So he came back and he spent a day or so fixing it, but it was a week later. If it had been a no-blame culture, it would have been fixed probably within a few hours. And it was just the blame culture that cost them at least half of that $750,000.
Very common.
It was really silly. And they asked me what I thought afterwards, and I told them. And everyone in the room agreed with me and said, yes, but don't tell him, he'll get angry. Idiots. But it's culture. I've worked in blame cultures and I've worked in no blame cultures. And it's a real shock going from no blame to blame. And I remember talking to, it was the ITSMF UK chair, Lieutenant Colonel, talking about blame cultures, and someone said, yes, it's horrible, blame cultures like the army. He said, no, absolutely not. The army has a no blame culture. If you've done something wrong with your rifle and it won't fire, you tell me now, not when I've asked you to deliver covering fire while I go out there into the field. And if you say, the rifle's got dirty, got bunged up, I don't know if it'll work, you are not blamed. You are told, right, absolutely correct. Now either fall out, change your rifle, do whatever, do something about it. You try and hide it, you're someone else that's going to get killed. So he said the army has a no-blame culture. Officially.
Yeah. Might work officially.
Well, he said, if you do it 3 times, I'll kill the bastard. But until that point, it's a no-blame culture.
It's a bit like the civil service and then no decision culture.
Yeah. Well. Are you certain about that?
No, I'm not sure.
I think it's an HP story about the guy who comes in with the new boss and gets to get together. He said, I've looked at what's happening, and the big problem here is that we've got a blame culture. And the voice from the back said, and whose fault's that then?
Any more questions?
Well, the place I was at last, I won't mention it, but the scenario there was that the IT manager would regularly come back in at night and sort out problems, and then became sort of elevated as a hero with the management because he would always come in and sort them out. The fact that he could have sorted them out and done other work to prevent these problems occurring, he wasn't interested in.
I used the term heroic
Yeah.
to refer to really bad ITIL.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you a civil service story, which we're denigrating the civil service from my head. Back in the day when they paid people in cash, one of the office girls, it always was, would go and collect £3,500 in cash, which was a lot of money in those days. And they send one of the blokes with her. That was the rule, she'd go on your own. And one day on the way back, somebody actually pushed her over and went take the money. And the boy, the young, fit, rugby-playing boy, barged in, flattens this bloke, gets the money back, pins him and escorts him to the police station. So the next day, he's called to the officer in charge of the office, expecting to be rewarded and praised and told he's a wonder. and he was given a formal reprimand for breach of the rules. Because never mind the money, he put the girl's risk at life. The standing rules say you're just there to be a passive threat, and if anything happens, you let them take the money. And yeah, we do not reward that kind of heroics, because if it goes right, great, but a lot of the time it doesn't. And heroes are always bad planning. You don't need heroes when you've got good planning. So, and if it's the boss coming in to do it, no.
Okay, well, we've got about another 5 minutes or so. There's probably some food still out there. And you can, if you've got any more questions, you can talk to Stuart and Ivor. But anyway, thank you very much, Stuart and Ivor, again. Can you give them...
Well, thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you, folks. Anybody wants a business card, let me know. Well, that's our business.
It all comes really independent.
Absolutely.
I don't have any